Berserkers, fearsome Viking warriors, famous for their fury, toughness, and combat skills. Ancient historical records of these almost mythical people tell tales of incredible display of strength and power. Many theories have aimed to explain how these people gained such renown in battle, particularly in a culture famous for its raiders and warriors. An idea was put forward in the 1700s by a Swedish historian named Samuel Odman. This theory proposed that the berserkers were consuming the toxic psychoactive mushroom called Amanita muscaria. Odman claimed that this mushroom would cause the warriors to go into a frenzy and attack with ferocity. Over the centuries, a debate has surrounded this theory, but new evidence suggests it could be something else altogether. Let's take an in-depth look at what Viking culture was genuinely like. It's time we separate the facts from fiction and explore the realities of this fascinating ancient culture whose influence is still felt strongly all across Northern Europe and Great Britain today. For many people, the word Viking inspires imagery of ferocious men wearing animal skins, tearing down their opponents with ease. Unfortunately, this imagery does not depict the average Scandinavian soldier with accuracy. However, it is much closer to a group of specialized warriors that we now call berserkers. So who actually were the berserkers? Among historians, the answer to this question is contested. Most evidence suggests that they would have been unique to the elite in society, handpicked by jarls, who were the rulers of ancient Scandinavian communities. It was originally believed that the word berserker came from the Norse words bear and sark, meaning bare-chested. This belief comes from the Yngling Saga, a book written by historian poet Snorri Sturluson. They went without coats of mail and acted like mad dogs and wolves, indicating that they fought in battle with no armor protecting their chest and behaved as animals. English and Old Norse experienced the same issue. Bear and bear are spelled and pronounced very similarly. As such, today's more accepted theory is that it actually means bear on chest, as in they wore bearskins upon their chests. It was not uncommon for more wealthy Scandinavians to wear bear furs. Multiple old Scandinavian texts refer to berserkers as Ulfheidin, which translates to warrior wearing wolf's skin. Evidence to suggest their high standing in society comes from a French poet named Chrétien de Troyes, who wrote a famous poem called Ivan the Knight of the Lion. The Norwegian king Håkon Håkonarsson had this poem translated in the 13th century. In this translated version, the French word for champion had become berserker. In this context, the champion was a high-ranking warrior explicitly chosen by the king. Today, there are many misconceptions around ancient Norse culture. Separating the facts from the fiction is key if we're going to have a more genuine understanding. Vikings lived in Northern Europe, in the areas that are now Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. They were primarily active from the 8th to the 11th century. It's important to recognize that not all people who lived in these areas were Vikings. So not every Scandinavian was a Viking, but every Viking was a Scandinavian. The word Viking is almost like a job title. Such a title belongs to the seafaring warriors who traveled long distances, raiding and colonizing vast areas of Europe on their travels. Raids across the British Isles were common, so much so that they even established some of the biggest cities in Ireland. Dublin, Cork, and Limerick were all founded by Viking settlers. Much of Scotland belonged to the Vikings, as well as several northern territories of England. In 866, a Viking warband led by Ivar the Boneless captured the city of Iforvik, made it their capital, and changed the name to Jorvik. Today, the city is known as York. France's northern coast was raided brutally, especially around Normandy. They crafted great long ships with advanced designs that could quickly travel up and along rivers. Their tactics were clever. The soldiers were fearless. In fact, their fearlessness came from their spiritual beliefs. The Vikings were initially pagan, believing in many gods belonging to the Norse pantheon. If a warrior were to die in battle, they would be promised eternal glory in the great mead halls of Valhalla. With the promise of everlasting bliss, a Viking welcomed battle, and as such they were fearsome opponents. And the most elite of these soldiers were the berserkers, shrouded in mystery. How is it that so little is known about such a prestigious people? as Christianity became the dominant religion, many remnants of ancient Scandinavian culture were destroyed. Christianity grew slowly in Scandinavia during the 12th century. Several Christian settlements known as dioceses were created across northern Europe. These dioceses were areas that were under the control of a Christian bishop. As Christianity grew, so did pagan persecution, considered blasphemous by Christians during the Middle Ages. Unfortunately for Norse historians, this means a lot of valuable information was lost during the religious shift towards Christianity. So why is this important to berserkers? Well, it means it's hard to say with absolute certainty how they lived. This is why there are so many theories about them. Egil's Saga is a book written by an Icelandic poet named Egil Skallagrimsson. People say about those who go into berserk fits is this, that as long as they're in the frenzy, they're so strong that nothing is too much for them. But as soon as they're out of it, they become much weaker than normal. While it is very likely that the stories shared by the Norsemen are exaggerated, there must be some elements of truth. Throughout all the ancient stories, there are several consistencies that we think we can now explain. The berserkers were said to go into a trance-like state called Berserkergang. The men would be capable of incredible feats of strength far beyond what ordinary men can do. It began with bodily shivering and cold chills. The men's faces would grow red as they became more and more agitated. Eventually, the agitation would develop into a full-blown rage. During this fury, the berserkers were resistant to fire and blades, and they would howl like animals and bite the edges of their shields. During this immense anger, the berserkers would cut down swathes of men with ease, often with such madness they could not even tell friend from foe. As written by Egil and many others, the rage would be followed by days of weakness, often requiring bed rest. This 12th century chess piece, carved from walrus ivory, was discovered showing a berserker gnawing on his shield. Pretty clear evidence for Berserkergang. And now that we know a bit more about Vikings, let me tell you why I think Samuel Oldman was wrong in his assumptions that the berserkers were consuming Amanita muscaria to induce Berserkergang. Amanita muscaria is the famous mushroom with a red cap. It is prevalent in folklore, often associated with spells, curses, and rituals. It can induce psychedelic effects in those who consume it, although it is also toxic. In the 1700s, which is when Oldman proposed his theory, much less was understood about the berserkers. With that in mind, let's take a look at what happens when Amanita muscaria is consumed. It becomes quite clear that the results would not be desirable for a warrior on the battlefield. Vomiting, diarrhea, sweating, dizziness, and trembling are all possible effects of the mushroom. I find it unlikely that warriors suffering from these problems would be as terrifying as described. Although there have been some reports of rage from its consumption, it is not particularly common. A much more likely candidate is the flowering plant called the Henbane. It is a hardy, tall-growing plant with an ominous-looking flower, frequently mentioned in European folklore, especially in the context of witches and dark magic. The plant originated in the Mediterranean and Balkan regions, but there is evidence to suggest that it was present in Scandinavia by the Roman Iron Age. The plant has a long history of medicinal and mystical uses across Europe and Asia. In 1398, a man known as Bartholomew. This herb is called insana wood, for the use thereof is perilous. For it be eaten or drank, it breatheth woodness or slow likeness of sleep. Therefore the herb is commonly called morlindi, for it taketh away want of reason. Woodness is an old English word for madness. It comes from the Norse god Vodin, now known as Odin. Odin was closely associated with storm fury. It is clear from his quote that people living in the Middle Ages were fearful of the herb. Across Europe, much of folklore surrounding Henbane is to do with the dark spells laying ruin to crops and livestock. On the other hand, in ancient Greece, it was treated almost entirely as a medicinal plant. If we look back to the quote from Bartholomew the English, he does also say it can bring about likeness of sleep. This likeness of sleep refers to henbane's anesthetic properties. It can dull pain and even bring about sleep in high enough doses. The ancient Greeks used henbane as an anesthetic when performing minor surgeries or to dull pain for those suffering from ailments. And in the modern day, it is recognized as a traditional medicine across Eastern Europe and Asia, and although it is native to Europe, it has become increasingly rare, especially in the north. Modern medicine recognizes the plant as a potential psychoactive because of 3 medicinal alkaloids that are found in its leaves and its stem. It's used most frequently in India, creating pharmaceuticals. In more casual settings, the leaves can be dried and smoked or infused with beverages to create psychedelic effects. However, I do not recommend using henbane as a drug. Its hallucinogenic effects are very unpleasant, and an incorrect dosage can lead to nasty side effects and even death. In fact, it's illegal to cultivate and sell in Europe and America due to its dangerous psychoactive properties. It's unsurprising that during the Middle Ages, the common person believed this plant was evil, used in dark rituals by sorcerers and witches. But with such risky side effects, why would berserkers consume this plant? Well, I imagine they would be experienced with its impact and would likely understand appropriate dosages. Priest or priestess would likely give each berserker an adequate dose to bring out the effects that would be advantageous in battle. So it's all starting to become more apparent that henbane is likely candidate for a plant that could bring about Berserkergang. We can break down each of the famous qualities of mighty berserkers and see how they fit in with the herb. The first quality is, of course, the unbridled fury. Old quotes and modern medicine show that smoking or consuming henbane can lead to fits of rage, which leads directly to the berserker's inability to determine friend from foe. Henbane-induced madness can result in face blindness. Face blindness removes a person's ability to recognize who they are looking at. If a mighty raging warrior also loses the ability to recognize his battle companions, it's not surprising that berserkers would end up cutting down their own men. As for tales of superhuman strength, there isn't really any scientific reason why berserkers would gain strength. Such claims are likely due to Norsemen exaggerating old stories. There is, however, a point to be made that a man fighting with pure anger and recklessness is expected to use as much of their strength as possible. This could definitely give the impression that they are beyond normal strength. In the old stories, there is repeated reference to the berserkers' resistance to fire and blades. Now, the Greeks were using henbane as anesthetic directly for centuries. It makes perfect sense that the berserkers would be able to shrug off wounds with anesthetic and adrenaline pumping through their blood. Some people also say that because the chemicals in henbane lower blood pressure and slow blood flow, that could contribute to their resilience and reduce blood loss. In truth, it is unlikely that this would come into effect, since to be noticeable, it would require a dose large enough to put somebody to sleep. Chattering, twitching, and bizarre behaviors such as biting shields are all common effects of drug-induced anxiety. The heat before a fight would be incredibly intense, especially as the berserkers begin to feel the potency of the herb. After the berserkers had raged their way through battle, they're said to become incredibly weak, as mentioned in Egil's saga. This fits perfectly with henbane's effects, which can cause someone to become enfeebled and feverish for up to 3 days after its consumption. Berserkers were considered shock troops, the people who charge in, break lines, and scatter the enemy, clearing the way for the army's main body. These elite warriors would have taken their obligations seriously. I imagine the consuming of henbane was ritualistic in nature, an honor and a privilege in dangerous situations. But how did they actually ingest the plant? While there's little evidence describing how they took plant, it's fairly easy to theorize based on what we already know. Today, its most common methods of consumption are through smoke or infusing the plant in some kind of drink. Both of these methods are possible during the Viking era. Scandinavians were known to smoke the plant Angelica through pipes, and it's equally likely that the herb could be infused in hot water to make tea or even in alcohol, which would create additional wild effects. If the berserkers consumed the herb in rituals, leaves could even be placed on fires to create an atmosphere of madness for all those nearby. This henbane hypothesis has opened an excellent discussion amongst historians, but where does this idea even come from? Well, as we know, berserkers were typically high rank in society, chosen by cultural leaders. As such, it is safe to assume that henbane was treated with high respect also. In Hobro of Denmark, archaeologists found a number of graves at the ring castles of Fjark and old Viking settlement. In total, 30 graves were excavated, and one of them belonging to a high-status priestess. She was buried with several important accessories, including a pouch containing henbane seeds. It is likely that the priestess would have distributed these seeds amongst the berserkers, the warriors of Odin. While Samuel Odman indeed proposed an exciting idea that Amanita muscaria was used to induce Berserkergang, there's just not enough evidence for it. Henbane is a highly prolific plant that was easy to find and cultivate. Amanita muscaria, on the other hand, is only found scarcely out in the woods. It is very hard to grow yourself due to its complex biology. Understanding the effects of potency of the Henbane, we could go further on to speculate about some of the most notorious written accounts and stories portraying berserkers. Arguably the most iconic event involving a berserker comes from the Battle of Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September 1066. The death of King Edward the Confessor of England had triggered a succession struggle in which a variety of contenders from across northwestern Europe fought for the English throne. These claimants included the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada. According to sources, the Norwegians assembled a fleet of 300 ships to invade England with anywhere from 7,000 to 11,000 men in their ranks. But it was the might of one legendary berserker that would truly make the story. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, upon arriving in the location, the English army was delayed by the need to pass through a choke point, a bridge that they had to cross in order to face the Norwegians. Their advance, however, was halted by a Norse axeman who blocked their way and single-handedly held up the entire English army, who must have numbered in the thousands. It is written that he may have cut down as many as 40 Englishmen and was defeated only when an English soldier floated under the bridge in a half barrel and thrust his spear through the planks. Thanks to the heroic efforts of this berserker and quite possibly a large dose of Henbane magic and alcohol, time was bought for the Norwegians to prepare for battle and regroup, as the arrival of the English had caught them by surprise. Despite the efforts, the Norwegians were mostly slaughtered and invasion failed, and the Battle of Stamford Bridge has traditionally been presented as symbolizing the end of the Viking Age. Of course, whether or not there really was a single man holding up the bridge, a retinue or not, is a matter very much disputed by historians, but it is a very interesting and a specific account. The history of going berserk, however, long predates Viking, and written accounts of berserker-like behavior can technically be found in many traditions around the world. Aztec warriors known as the Quatri, the Assyrians, the Celts, and even in modern times during World War II, such as the Japanese banzai charges. But whether all half-naked warriors of ancient times roused themselves to fighting madness, consumed psychoactive substances to go into battle, is largely unknown. And it is perhaps for this reason that the Viking and Germanic berserkers have been most fondly remembered in popular culture. Thanks to the Henbane and probably a prolific consumption of alcohol, they really may have believed and to a certain extent really became animals, leaving behind a thick history of legend and popular culture. And it's incredible discoveries like the one at Fjarkat that unlock new information and tools that we can use to help solve the mysteries of ancient civilization. Now, check out some of these relief maps that I've recently designed. Go to geoperspective.org, decorate your room with one of my unique maps, and support the creation of more videos just like these. Patrons are also most welcome, and will be able to download free wallpapers once they sign up. Now, have a guess where this is, leave a comment for the algorithm, and I'll see you in my next video. Geoperspective out.